All right, we're going to get started here shortly. Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Andrew Beinbrink, and let me get my video up and running so you guys can see that as well. Hold on here. Okay, cool. There we go. Awesome. Well, we got a lot to cover tonight. We're going to wait a couple more minutes. I want to make sure that we're all set up. All right. So, oops. Hold on one second. I'm just navigating a few different things here. And first in the chat, if you don't mind, while we're waiting for a few more people to join, how is my audio? Can everybody hear me okay? If you can type in the chat just on the quality of my audio. All right, great. Thanks, Alex, Jody, Diana, Brendan, Max, awesome. That's great to hear. If you're not familiar with Zoom, we're going to give you a quick crash course. So you're going to use this chat, to answer questions. And also there's a Q&A option that you can use as well to be able to just to be able to get raise a question that we might answer a little bit later. So you got two different options on how you can ask questions. We'll try to keep this interactive. We'll be posting some different things in the chat as well. Awesome. While we're waiting to get started, if you don't mind, maybe just put what your son's grad year is, or if if a student athlete's on the Masterclass tonight, go ahead and put your grad year. Hopefully we got a good amount of student athletes on as well. So nice. Thanks, Luke, Tony, Jennifer, Major. I like that name, Major. Stacy, thank you, Matt. Okay, awesome. This just helps give us an idea, and Coach Grasse an idea of who the audience is, what's going on, and just a really better idea of what's going on. So let me make sure, Jonathan, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
We got you. Can everybody hear Jonathan loud and clear? I just want to make sure his audio is good too. Let's just see. Thank you, Stacy. Good. Awesome. Okay. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, we're already at capacity. So there are going to be some people that can't get into the Zoom that are going to be redirected to a live stream on YouTube. So we'll make sure that that's going as well right now. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. And we got a lot to cover tonight. And obviously this is a super exciting topic, Ivy League recruiting. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions about Ivy League recruiting. And so we're going to take about the next 60 to 75 minutes to really dive in and make sure that you all get up to speed on how Ivy League recruiting works. And we've had, a tremendous amount of experience for the last 12 plus years. So we're going to share things that maybe you've never even heard before, relative to kind of the intricacies of not just Ivy League recruiting, but also Ivy League from an academic standpoint and how those interplay as well. So if you just joined us right now, feel free to use the chat, for questions. Feel free to use, the other Zoom tools that you have to be able to raise your hand or ask questions from that standpoint as well. And we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, cool. So let me first, obviously this is why we're all here, tonight, and that is to really break down the Ivy League. And most of you are familiar with probably some of the schools, but maybe not all of them. and we're going to dive into each one of them. You might not recognize every logo, but let's just go around the horn clockwise. You got Harvard, Brown, Penn, Dartmouth, Cornell, Princeton, Columbia, and Yale. And so this is my background. I was actually recruited by Dartmouth when I was coming out of high school. I chose a different route. I chose it came between Stanford and ASU. I ended up actually choosing Arizona State. And we'll dive into why it was the right fit for me a little bit as we uncover really more about Ivy League recruiting. But I want to also introduce Coach Grasse and Jonathan. Yeah, please feel free. And Jonathan and I actually met each other on the recruiting trail a few years back when he was recruiting at Brown, and hit it off, and then got reconnected last year. And Jonathan is a wealth of knowledge. He's on our staff. And so, yeah, Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so good to get on here and kind of chat with you guys this afternoon or this evening about Ivy League recruiting and really high academic recruiting in general. But just a little bit about myself. I pitched at a Division II school in Pennsylvania my final 2 years. I got into coaching, then really right after that, I was at a Division III school in PA at York College for 3 years. Then I went down to Furman, which is down in South Carolina, for 2 years, and then I spent 5 years as the pitching coach at Brown. So I got really the last 7 years, I would say, was, very, very, very high academic schools, obviously 5 years being in the Ivy League. So I got a good grasp in terms of, what are they looking for academically? What are they looking for academically or athletically? And then kind of the different intricacies within the league itself, that makes each school kind of different. Just because when you're obviously recruiting against, those schools and playing against them, you see those guys out a lot, the other assistants, and you kind of get to know them, and you kind of get to know what they're doing and kind of how they're doing things within their programs.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in. Obviously Jonathan and I, have a great relationship prior to him, joining our staff, but we've developed over the last 12 plus years, as you can imagine, building relationships with the Ivy League programs and the different coaches. And this was just a testimonial talking about our program. Our programs, SportsForce is a huge help because we can't see every potential recruit nationwide that might be a great fit for us. And your program gives us the type of scouting reports, videos, and metrics we need. And I bring that up because the Ivy League programs are unique. So let's just say you're at a school, high academic school, like a good example, might be like Rice in Texas. Good high academic school. They're not going to recruit nationwide. Now the Ivies are a different animal. They're recruiting from coast to coast, from Maine to California and from Washington to Florida, just anywhere and everywhere to get, and even international sometimes if it might be the right fit. So, and that's just a different animal. So first, before we kind of dive into more Ivy League stuff, we've kind of broken down, what are some of the challenges that most families go through in the recruiting process, whether it's Ivy League or not. And just quickly, not understanding how recruiting works. And I'm not saying that most families should understand exactly how it works or know the ins and outs, because it is a unique and compelling process. Number two is often unrealistic expectations and a college target list. This is a very competitive process, and there is many more Division III schools that are high academic than there are Division I schools that are very high academic. And then wasting money on the wrong camps. Let me get a kind of quick show of hands in the chat. Give us an idea about how many camp invites you've received, if you were to just guess, in the last 90 days, whether it's, an individual showcase, a college camp, an individual college camp. I'm just curious. So, yeah, 100 said Nathan, 15 to 20 from Nicholas, Felix was saying 8. Yeah, we get it. 6, 15 plus, probably dozens, Matthew said, and 100%. And so cutting through the noise of what camps make sense is not easy. And most families waste thousands of dollars chasing down the wrong camps in this process, especially in the high academic recruiting process. All right, so the next one is just where to spend your money and your time, because more than just going to camps, you're also trying to visit schools, especially if you're a high academic student athlete. There's seems to be more emphasis on trying to get on campus. And then obviously getting recruited, by the right colleges is a huge challenge, realizing how competitive the recruiting process is. So Jonathan and we're going to go back and forth on the Masterclass today, and be able to make sure that we hit home as many points as possible. And to be fair, we could probably spend the next 3 hours and still not cover everything related to Ivy League recruiting, but we're going to do our best to really hit home as many of the most hard-hitting facts and action items, and really the knowledge around how to best position your son, your family in this whole process. So, Jonathan, if you don't mind, maybe talking about kind of some of these mistakes, and then we'll dive deeper as we go along.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and me and you've talked about this, Andrew, before, is a lot of times guys will say, hey, I'm interested in all 8 Ivy League schools, and while yes, of course you're interested in all 8 Ivy League schools, there's so many big differences in terms of where are they located, what's the campus setting, different things like that. What's the differences in their baseball programs that there's a big range. While yes, they are, in that, top tier of the best schools in the entire world, but each of them make a big difference in terms of, one another. One example, right, is an easy one. And there's 2 in one state, right? Like if you look at Cornell and Columbia, well, you go on their campuses, you're going to be talking about 2 totally different campus settings. And certain guys from certain areas of the country may fit in better in one, and some guys may fit better in another. And it's kind of, starting to learn, even if you can't physically go, and we'll hit on visiting them, but even if you can't physically go to every one, just, pop online. I know Brown has an awesome one with a drone. It's like a live drone that, kind of gives you a campus tour of the school. But it'll just give you a little bit of a better feel, like, hey, what is the school and the campus actually like? And then dive into, academically, within the curriculum, what makes, them unique and different, because they're all very, very, very different, in terms of the curriculum as well. So kind of understanding, like, hey, there are differences. Yes, they are, in the Ivy League, but there's some major differences between all 8 of them.
Absolutely. And I would say this other one is at the bottom is not developing other college offers and options. And Jonathan, you've seen this, where all the eggs are in the basket of, yep, Brown or whatever school it might be, or they're in the basket of, 2 or 3 Ivy League programs. And we'll go into how competitive it is and how many different players that a coach who's at an Ivy League program is looking at and talking to at the same time. And that'll be kind of mind numbing, as well. But let's move along. So obviously we touched on, the 8 different Ivies earlier. And so this is, buying the brand versus buying the right college fit. And Jonathan, do you want to hit home on, any of these topics a little bit more than you just previously did?
No, I think I kind of hit on it, obviously with the campus and the area setting, the school culture, obviously, kind of hit on that a little bit too. The size of the school, like even, all 8, there's a pretty big difference between all 8. in terms of the size. So, look at that, look at the class size, how many, what's the, per student to professor ratio, and then obviously the baseball differences, right? Like, talk to each of, if you get a chance to talk to each of the coaches, kind of figure out, which one, maybe, makes more sense to you, or, hits more home to you, when you're kind of going through it, because again, that's going to also play a big part of it. You're going to spend more time, with those, 3 or 4 coaches on staff than you are with anybody really else on campus. So, that's a huge deal in the process as well, is finding the right fit and the right coaching staff to kind of work with.
Yeah. And so to give a good, clear example of this, so let's think about, Columbia University is in, upper West Side Manhattan, right? So that is a much different animal than being in where Dartmouth is located, in a much more rural setting than being in downtown New York, or uptown New York, to be specific. And then why don't you share a little bit about what Brown's kind of community and areas like as a setting, in your opinion, Jonathan,
Yeah.
and maybe touch on a couple other schools that you're really familiar with as well.
Yeah, Brown was kind of unique because, it had, you were in a capital city, but you kind of were in your own little pocket of a capital city. So everybody walked to class. You weren't taking a subway, or you weren't taking, a bus to practice or anything like that. So it was kind of unique, where it was like, if you wanted the city, it was kind of right there. But if you didn't want the city, we would always say, you didn't really even know it was there. So that's obviously unique. Obviously, Cornell and Dartmouth are going to be, a little bit more rural. Penn, Harvard, and, Columbia, you're going to be, obviously in, very, very, very metropolitan areas. And then kind of Brown's kind of a little bit in, different in terms of, Yale and Princeton. They're kind of like almost in like a suburb a little bit more. And then obviously Brown, you're in the capital city, but you're kind of in your own little pocket. So, that's one of the things that, will play a part, right? Like, and I remember recruiting guys, especially guys that were from, smaller high schools, or, more rural parts of the country. And one of the things they would say is like, yeah, hey, we went to go visit Columbia, but like Manhattan was just overwhelming. Whereas you would talk to guys in the other way, and they would just say, hey, I fell in love with, Columbia, or I fell in love with Penn because, of the city, being in the city. And that was something I really, really wanted. So kind of just understanding that, and again, going on the campus, or at least watching a video and kind of getting a feel for it, and say, hey, this is something that I definitely want. Or is something that I definitely don't think I could, succeed in, because it's a big part of it.
Yeah. And the reason we bring this up and spend as much time on this is we hear, all the time, like, oh, we're interested in the Ivies. And that's such like a blanket statement, because there are such drastic differences between each of them. So kind of getting clear on what actually is the goal, and what is the filtering to determine what type of schools actually make the most sense within the Ivy League is really important, because it also ranges the spectrum in terms of liberal versus conservative as well. So the cultures can be quite different too. And that's sometimes you don't, uncover that just from basic research at looking at their academic profile or their baseball team. There's some nuance that's definitely part of this as well. So, visiting the Ivy League schools, and we just put together a map, and as you can tell, it kind of covers all the way from Brown up here in Providence, all the way down to, Princeton, down here in New Jersey. So, just to give you an idea of what you're dealing with in terms of kind of space between one and the other. Not realistic to try to visit, all Ivy League schools in a weekend, unless you're just, crazy. So, targeting the right fit, targeting the right time to visit, understanding, how a camp works versus we'll say a visit that's not at a camp. That's all really important as well. Jonathan, if you don't mind, while we're on this topic, share a little bit about your thought process. Obviously, COVID has threw a wrench into last year's recruiting, visiting process. But in general, as things start to open up, this summer and into the fall, how would you give some advice on combining a camp with an actual visit, and just, break that down for us?
So there's two parts to that, I would say. So just for guys that are, and I know that we have a lot of 23 grads in here too. So if you're a 2023 grad, you cannot meet with the coaching staff until September 1st of your junior year. Okay, so that's for 23s and 24s. So if you go to a camp and you say, hey, I'm going to go and ask them if I can get a tour after the camp or before the camp, they cannot do that by NCAA rules. So, that's just one of the things to know is that, guys they would send emails. Well, hey, I'm going to be on campus, in the summer, going into my junior year. Can you come and just kind of sit down with me? And really technically they're not even supposed to respond to that email. So if you're sending that stuff out, that's probably why you're not getting responses or coaches are saying no. It's because they're not allowed. But anytime after September 1st of your junior year, you can do a visit and you can sit down with a coaching staff, or they can give you a tour. Or they can give you a tour. They can sit down and talk with you. They can do all of that stuff. One of the things that I always used to suggest to guys, if you're going to an on-campus camp, it's a good idea to go and take a school tour the day before, the day after the camp. And again, you go online, just type in visiting Columbia, visiting Penn, and it'll take you to the admissions website. And that will allow you to kind of see if there's tours available at that time. It just gives you a good idea of a little bit more about the school. We would even tell guys sometimes, even if we were giving them an actual tour, sometimes it wasn't the worst idea for mom or dad or the student athlete to even look into just doing a regular campus tour just to get more familiar with the school. Because it's going to be, a student, or it's going to be, a grad student that will be doing the tours, and they'll kind of give you a little bit more like the ins and outs, like, oh, you never eat at this dining hall, or, hey, this is a shortcut to kind of walk, when you're on campus, or, hey, here's a cool place off campus to go and eat. But they'll give you kind of some more stuff about it. So it is a good idea to do a regular admissions tour. When you're going to visit, or when you're going to a camp, either, like I said, either the day before, the day after, or if there's time in between. If you email the coaching staff and say, hey, is there going to be time, where I'm not going to be, on the field doing things, maybe you can get a 2-hour window where you can get a tour, maybe even the same day.
Yeah, those are great points. How's my audio? I'm just curious how my audio sounds. I'm getting a little bit of a background. All right, so I'll keep on going if my audio sounds good. We're going to deal with a few questions that come up here shortly at the end of this slide. So why don't we talk about, how do Ivy League coaches actually evaluate you? And Jonathan and I we'll tag team on this one. But so number one is, they recruit nationwide. So just imagine for each grad year class, you got over 100,000 players that are 22s or 23s or 24s in each grad class. Obviously, they're going to look at the academic profile. We're going to go into more detail on this. They're going to evaluate the athletic profile, of course, and that's from the video, the stats, the metrics, and as much as they can get digitally and online as they possibly can, especially with the limitations in recruiting budgets and the recruiting periods that are available. So, and one thing COVID did was it also impacted recruiting budgets as well. And then number four is, the constant, we'll say, cycles of, all right, who am I recruiting? How do they rank on our recruiting board? And then constantly reevaluating. And so if you think about, let's say you're a 2022 right-handed pitcher, and you're throwing topping out 85 right now, 86. These college coaches are going to constantly be reevaluating you literally on a month-to-month, sometimes week-to-week basis to be able to understand how they're stack ranking their recruiting board in the recruiting process, because they're trying to survey an entire country of athletes, potential recruits. So it's really a huge advantage if, as a player, you're organized, you're getting college coaches relevant and ongoing updates, not only in a timely manner, but also the type of video and the metrics that they look for to make better decisions. And so there's a lot that can be done without actually having to fly to a campus to see a coach or go to a showcase as well. And we'll talk more about that. And then, finally, obviously, the interviewing process between the athlete and the family and the coaching staff, and Zoom's become a huge tool when it's time to get face to face with college coaches in the recruiting process, and then that verbal offer being made, and then them helping walk you through the application process during the senior year as well. And so each Ivy League school on average is only going to have a total of 8 supported student athlete spots per year. And so that's very different than most other Division I programs that are out there. And we'll talk more about that, but that's a key distinction. So that's the average. So if you say 8 schools in the Ivy Leagues times 8 students per year, that's 64 players that are being supported as student athletes to get into those schools. And that's out of, we'll say, there's over 100,000 that are in each grad year that are playing around the country, but that's out of a few thousand players that are part of just what I'd consider the high academic Ivy League level recruiting process of players that those coaches are going to follow and track. And we'll go over that in even more detail as we move along. So yeah, Jonathan, why don't you hit on these academic, keys to success, because this is a huge issue, or a huge topic.
Yeah. And one of one of the things that guys obviously will look at is right, can you how good are you, can you play for their program, and then the next is, can they get you in a school? And both are equally important, because you can throw 95 miles an hour, but if you have a 2.0 GPA, it doesn't really matter. And then on the other hand too, you have to remember, right, that even if you have a 36 ACT or 1600 SAT and a 4.0, if you can't play and you're not good, if they don't think you're good enough, then it really doesn't matter either. So both are super important. Obviously, the ability, but also the GPA. The transcript rigor is a question that comes up a lot, and a lot of guys will ask us, well, hey, should I take a honors and AP class and get a B, or should I take a normal class and then get an A? Well, really, the answer should be you should take the AP class and get an A. Not a B, but that's an important part of it, because they're going to look at it and they can be picky, the admissions people. They got a lot of different people that want to apply. They have a lot of players that, want to play at, an Ivy League school. So it's very, very, very important to also take hard classes, but also make sure you're getting good grades in those classes. For the guys that are 2022s, the test optional will be an approach that the Ivy League is going to use. The way test optional works, and actually when I was at Furman, we were test optional as well. But the way test optional works is basically it can only help you. So if you do really well on it, and it will help your admission, it'll help your application status. Where it won't hurt you. So something to think about is maybe take it early, see how you do, and then figure out, like, all right, hey, can I do much better, or is this kind of my limit? And then from there, then you'll kind of have a better idea of, like, is this going to help on my application, or is it not? Supported admissions, and that's what, like Andrew was talking about, there's about 8 per year in each school. Basically allows you to get a player in to school that wouldn't normally get into school is the easiest way to put it. It's a little bit less academic standards. when you're talking about guys that, when you're talking about the spots, or however you slots, whatever you want to call it, that is what a supported admission is. So you have 8 supported admission slots. They still need to be approved by admissions, but you just have more flexibility in terms of academically where are they at. And then the application and the interview is really, with COVID and really in the last 3 years, though, 2 to 3 years, each school is kind of different in terms of what are they doing with the application and the interview process. Are they even doing it? Are they not doing it? Are they doing it via Zoom? All that kind of plays into it. So each school is a little bit different in terms of, the 8, in terms of what they're doing for the application and the interview process.
Yeah, Jonathan, a question came up about how does this compare to an IB school? So, AP versus IB.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? They want to see you in hard classes is the best way to put it, and they want to see you in a bunch of hard classes. And one of the things that comes back a lot is when you're submitting their senior year, class schedule, they'll come back and say, admissions will come back and say, hey, well, we need them to add one more AP class, or hey, we need them to add one more honors class, because they're not just not in enough. So the more APs, the more honors, the more hard classes that you're taking, the better it's going to be in terms of your transcript when they submit all that information.
Absolutely. Why don't we touch on a little bit of, and let me go back a slide here, so we can look at the schools. So, Jonathan, why don't you go around the horn, or just kind of the grouping relative to academic, ranges, and how, if you were to summarize, how the different schools look at, GPAs, and kind of test scores.
So traditionally, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are going to be in a little bit of a higher academic, they're going to need a little bit higher academically, whether that's a little bit more in terms of the test score, maybe an extra honor or an AP class they may need more. But the other 5 are very, very, very similar in terms of what they need in terms of test score, the area that the test needs to be in, and or the kind of what the transcript needs to look like in order for them to give them a supported spot. So that's kind of the way it breaks down. And again, each situation is different. That doesn't mean that, Harvard, Yale, or Princeton is, I got this score, so I can definitely go there. Or I definitely can't go there because I have this test score. It just kind of depends. And each case is a case by case basis. And that's one of the things that, sometimes can be frustrating for Ivy coaches, is because, the admissions people look at each application as an individual, on an individual basis. So each school may value it different, and each case is going to end up being different. So it's just kind of hard to and I know that's a big question, is hey, what's just the blanket answer of what do I need to be at with my, GPA and my test score? And there's just not a blanket answer, unfortunately.
Well, you had said when we were catching up earlier before, that in general, you were saying the 30, 13, 50 those are really good test score ranges if the player is getting actively recruited, to feel pretty safe with most of the Ivies. But those elite 3 that you talked about, you might be on the fringe there. Yep.
Yeah. And again, not every case is going to be definite, but something we always would say is hey, you get to a 30 or a 1350, 1360 in that range, you're getting to a spot where even if that right now is not good enough, you should be within striking distance of what you need to get to.
Yep. And we've seen in our experience with 12 years of doing this and guiding student athletes through the Ivy League recruiting process, we have seen student athletes that were in the 3.6, 3.8 range GPA wise, still taking, rigorous, courses at the high school level, and then getting, SAT scores of 1250 or ACT of 2728, and being able to get in to a number of different Ivy League programs. Now, keep in mind, that is them getting down to the bottom of the funnel as one of the best players one of the best high academic players in the country to be part of that recruiting decision. So just everything. I mean, when Jonathan says things have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, it's because different schools are going to, in essence, flex their muscles in terms of how to try to get in a student athlete if they really need it. It might be per a position that they really are looking for, and the academic office can work with the coaches to a certain degree. And so if there is, potentially 3 lower level, high academic students that they're trying to get in, then another 3 might have to be a bit stronger, to support, to try to balance it out. And I know the Ivies used to have a band system with an academic index and really make this whole process convoluted. But I guess, Jonathan, would you say that that's now being managed in a less structured process, but it's still, there is some method to the madness?
Yeah, they got rid of so the Ivy League itself didn't get rid of the band system. It's just baseball does not use the band system. But basically what they do is you get assigned a certain amount of points based off your academic information. And then from there you need to meet an average. The other piece to what you were hitting on, Andrew, is that certain admissions departments at the schools, right? And each school will be different. Certain admissions departments are going to value different things on your transcript, on your application itself. So that's another piece to the whole thing is that, one school may value something that you have on there more than another, which may be able to allow you to get into school. So that's where the kind of that very, very subjective answer comes in is just because there's just so many different pieces. Where does the coaching staff see you? And then obviously where does the admissions people see you and what do they value, right? That plays a big part in it as well.
All right, let's move on. I know there's a number of questions in the chat, but we got a lot to cover, and I want to make sure we're kind of serving the entire audience because there's a bunch of people on YouTube watching that couldn't get into the Zoom as well. So this is just kind of class of 2020, some, applications to acceptance rates, just to give you kind of an idea. And these numbers in terms of applications were just like crazy, partially because of COVID and whatnot. And this is 2021. So the numbers got even higher in terms of the number of applications to acceptance rate. So, and just the quick answer, why is there become more applications? Well, a couple things. One of them is with the test optional approach, that really opened up a can of worms in terms of, everybody, let's throw my hat into the ring and let's see if I get into Harvard, or let's see if I get into Columbia or whatever school it might be. And this was on a global basis. This wasn't just on a US only basis. And then also the other thing that delayed it or why 2021 kind of bumped is a lot of class of 2020 students did like a postgraduate year or did a gap year. So that's where these numbers kind of, really skyrocketed as well. Anything else to add on that, Jonathan?
No, that you hit it perfect right there.
Okay, cool. So, the traditional, Ivy League process is going to be this 4-step application, essay, gathering recommendations and going through the interview process. Now, different schools have taken different approaches to this. So this isn't just carte blanche. Every Ivy League school is going to follow a strict, rigorous 4-step application process, and it's the same across the board. Jonathan, if you don't mind, maybe speak to that quickly before we move along.
Yeah, and like we were talking about a little bit before, right? Like the application, the essay, the recommendations, the interview. Each school is going to be a little bit different in terms of, numbers 3 and 4 especially. Basically, step 1 and step 2 are going to be pretty similar across the board. But how many recommendations do you need? Do you need teacher recommendations? I remember 5 years ago when I first started at Brown, or 6 years ago when I first started at Brown, we needed I think we needed 4 or 5 recommendations, and 2 had to be from teachers, and then you needed an outside person. Whereas my last few years, they kind of cut that down in terms of the total amount of recommendations. The interview had started to change, and then obviously with COVID, they started doing, some schools started doing Zoom interviews, and then some other schools kind of got away from it completely. So those 3 and 4 are going to be kind of, in a case-by-case basis, where obviously your application and your essay are extremely important, whether you're a student athlete or not. I remember, especially in the month of October, we would be going through with our guys that were committed, and we'd be going through the essay and, kind of talking them through it and how important it actually was, because it's a huge part in actually getting that, that likely letter.
Yep, absolutely. So quickly, what are 5 advantages to being recruited to an Ivy League program? The admissions process, I put a 10x advantage, and Jonathan was joking earlier that it's like a 1000x advantage, to get into an Ivy League school as a recruited student athlete. Nobody really knows the exact, advantage, but I would say it's definitely 10x or more. And then number 2 is, since the Ivy League programs are Division I, they provide a unique balance between athletic and academic that most Division I schools, I don't think, provide. So that is another, I guess, kind of, advantage to that Ivy League route. Number 3 is obviously the academic programs and the prestige of the programs as well. So that goes without saying. Now, different schools are going to have different levels of prestige depending on their school and the actual, program or major, that or concentration that's to be focused on. So, and then 4, financial aid. So there was someone that on the chat that said, what if we get an academic scholarship and this, that? There's no academic scholarships to Ivy League schools. 0. And that usually catches people off guard. It's like, well, what are you saying? There's no academic scholarships to Ivy League schools. So Jonathan, do you want to explain kind of how they do the aid process for Ivies?
Yeah. So the basically the way it works is that they read you blind, it's called. So that means basically what you turn into, you basically turn into a number. And what they'll do is that they'll have you submit some tax information and some other, necessary information that they need in the financial aid department. And then they'll basically assign you a number. They don't know if you are a supported student athlete or a regular student, doesn't matter to them. And then they will basically put your numbers into a calculator, and they'll figure out what you can afford to pay. And then that will be the number that they spit back to you. Sometimes it's a number that is way bigger than you expect, were expecting. And then there's other times where it's way lower than what you were expecting. There's really not much they can do. There is a small appeal process to it if you wanted to, but basically once that number kind of comes back, that's kind of where you're at. One thing I would do is I would go on the individual schools' financial aid websites, and I would just play around with the numbers and just see if it's even an area that you even think you can afford. Because there's a lot of times where it'll come back at a number and you just simply can't afford that. And for whatever reason, that's what the formula spit back that you could afford. That's what they're saying. But it's a number that you actually can't, in fact, afford. So it's definitely something where you want to look at it and go on their financial aid websites and play with it. I know on Brown's, they have one that's like you basically put in 5 different numbers or 3 different numbers, something like that. And it'll spit back like best case scenario, probable, and then worst case scenario. And I think they said like something to do with like 72% or 78% of the time it comes back in that middle number 2 number, and like 98% of the time it comes back between 1 and 3. So it'll at least give you a kind of a range to kind of see like where are you even going to be at in terms of the, kind of the bill.
Yeah. And why don't you touch on kind of academic tutoring and just kind of supporting student athletes at the Ivy League level?
Yeah, so obviously the support's really, really, really good. I know at Brown we used to be able to get you a tutor within 24 hours. Outside of like a couple of majors, there's certain majors that you can't get tutors as quickly. But one of the things that we always would see is a lot of times our guys were pretty self-aware, and they kind of had an idea, whether it was older teammates or other guys that were in their same major. And what they would do is they would kind of just get tutors and they would schedule them out earlier. So they'd go on the website and say, hey, we got, a long road trip. We're going to Texas A&M, this weekend. And then we fly home late Sunday night, late Monday we get in, early Monday we get in, and we're leaving for Cal on Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday. Well, let me just get a tutor for my class. And then if I don't need it, I can just always just cancel it. So a lot of times guys would do that, and they would just kind of look at their schedule and look at our schedule and say, all right, hey, when are we going to be super busy in terms of, the baseball side of things? And let me just kind of line myself up and just set myself up for success in the classroom without having to, having a coach tell you that, hey, you got to kind of do this.
Awesome. So I'll go through this quickly, kind of the top 5 ways that COVID has impacted, college recruiting. And most of these apply to the Ivies, but the last one really, really doesn't. But the D1 dead period, now is just going to be opening up. June 8th is the first time D1s are going to be able to get in person with players in well over a year. And so there are some limitations on how much they're going to be recruiting over the summer. There's a few dead periods within the whole summer as well. The shift of recruiting timeline and budgets. More Ivies are recruiting players earlier and making offers earlier than what we've seen in the past. Nowhere near like where, Vanderbilt or TCU or, Duke is going to be making offers to players in the 9th and 10th grade. That's very rarely happening with Ivies. But there have been some sophomores, some 10th graders that have been offered by some Ivies, but mostly I would say just there's been a limited number of juniors that have been offered by Ivy League programs right now. The roster impact and surplus of players, is another issue. The eligibility waiver, Jonathan, maybe paint a picture of just at Brown. I know you're in touch with, Mac and Grant, just in terms of what percentage of players wanted to use their extra year of eligibility versus just graduate and move on.
So the funny thing too is that when the Ivy League came out with when they approved that they were going to let 5th years go for next year, the funny part of the timing of it all was almost all of, I think 7 of the 8 had already passed the point of post grad the application process. So the guys couldn't even stay if they wanted to, because they couldn't get into post grad because the deadline or the timeline, I'm sorry, had passed. So basically where they're at is they're not really, their rosters are actually might even be smaller than, they have been in the past, because they had lost some players maybe to the transfer portal, and then obviously guys graduating. So they're actually not in a roster of surplus. They're going to be in a roster where they normally are, right around 30. Some are going to be a little bit higher. Some are going to be a little bit lower, but they're right about a 30. You're not going to have those 5th year guys coming in, because they don't do that in the Ivy League. So they're kind of really, nothing's really changed, from 2019 and 2020. It really hasn't changed for the roster for 2021 and 2022. So, they're kind of got their same admission slots, and it's not going to be like some of the other places where you're looking, where you show up the first day of practice and get 40 to 50 guys on the field.
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to go really quickly on this one. And so I got the Ivy League right here. Their season last year was canceled. And that was, pretty devastating for a lot of those players and coaches. But they're going to be dead until, like I said, June 8th. And then, yes, actively recruiting. Although the roster limits are going to be moved to 40 for all Division I next year. The Ivy League, programs typically don't carry that many. And Jonathan, why don't you touch on that just so we can kind of handle that elephant in the room?
The so yeah, so the guys that are able to handle will have 40 next year. This year in 2021 they had no limit. Next year they'll go to 40. And then like we said, the Ivies are not going to get quite to that number. They'll be probably closer to that 30 number. The thing with the 40 is that if you are on scholarship money, you got to count towards the 27, and then they can have basically 13 walk-on players on the roster where they have to cut it down. But they have no limit in terms of the fall. How many each school might, but in terms of like the Division I, they have no limit on how many guys are able to have in the fall. So guys may show up and they're going, hey, I'm going to make the team. Well, there's 56 or 58, 60 guys there, and they got to cut it down to 40. So that obviously is a pretty big number to cut. But next year that's the number they're going to have to get to. Whereas this year they basically were able to have an unlimited roster.
Yeah, and Jonathan, you were referencing more of traditional Division I's, not Ivy League. If you were to estimate fall at, let's just say fall at Brown or fall at Harvard or, fall at Princeton this year, how many players do you think will come out for the fall before they trim it down? Because I know we just had a player who was recruited, accepted. Well, sorry, he was recruited, but he wasn't given a supported spot, but he got into an Ivy League program. He's going to be part of the fall. And he's going to have to, prove himself as one of those, few that get in on their own and be able to make the team.
Yeah. So, and that's a kind of a school by school basis, depending on what your roster limit is, because of the school will sometimes put a limit on how many guys you're able to have. So within the Ivy League, there may, one school maybe, their limit may be 36 or 35. And another one might be 30. So that usually goes into the fall. I mean, most of them, to be honest, they'll, I know Brown will do they would do a walk-on tryout, let guys kind of, see what they got basically in a showcase setting. If we felt like there was something there, we would basically invite them there for the entire fall. And then from there, you have to kind of get it down to, by your opening day. By opening day is the night before opening day. You need to have your roster to, whatever the school or whatever the NCAA says is your limit. So it just kind of depends. Certain schools may have 35 or 36 guys show up in the fall, and you have 6 or 7 guys trying out. I'll be honest, we've had years at Brown where we had nobody try out. So it just kind of depends on a case by case basis.
That's great. Thanks for going deeper in that. So, hot recruiting topics to cover on the high academic side, player development and showcase readiness. Many of you might be either signed up to or going to be signing up to some different showcases or camps, just being prepared and ready. Many of these showcases can start at like 7:30 a.m. And we see it over and over again where the player isn't ready at 100% full speed and warmed up to be able to handle like the 60-yard sprint or whatever they end up doing as one of the first drills. So just be, warmed up, ready, make sure, you've taken care of, from a training and preparation standpoint, you're rested and really good to go and put your best foot forward in this process. Now, college coaches know that it's very rarely that a player is going to come out to a showcase and just perform perfectly. So coaches are looking for what they would say is flashes of ability that would translate, to the college level. And that might be, from a pitching standpoint to show some dominance, with certain pitches, from a hitting standpoint, being able to handle maybe high velocity or different locations, and then defensively being able to show the right actions, and at the right speed to be a potential good fit. The next topic is academic showcases. So many of you have probably been, emailed, head first this, show ball. There's a few different other, high academic showcases that are out there. You've probably gotten individual camp invites as well. And I would say a few things to really consider is are the right schools that you're looking for and targeting, are they going to be at that specific showcase? So that, and ideally as many of them as possible could be at that showcase as well. I would say number two is making sure that, because the Ivy League recruiting process is quite unique, trying to get in front of, the head coach at a school is important in this process. And most often you have an opportunity to do that. You can definitely go to the individual camp of that college. But that's also a very expensive way to go about it, especially if you're considering maybe 3 or 4 different Ivy League programs. And being able to time it might also be a challenge to be able to get to 3 or 4 different programs within a short window during the recruiting process. So if you're looking at, an academic showcase that has head coaches, Showball is we have a relationship with the owner of Showball, and we have a good relationship. And as I started to research into understanding high academic recruiting, I saw that there were some events that were having sometimes, people that were attending that weren't critical in the decision-making process. And so you really got to be mindful of making sure that you're getting seen by the decision makers at the college in this recruiting process, because you might only get seen once or twice in person by the colleges that you're hoping to get recruited by. So that is that's a huge impact in terms of just how to position yourself, realizing all of these Ivy League schools are recruiting all over the country, and they have a long list of players that they're trying to cross-reference against each other on an ongoing basis to determine who they're really going to, look at making phone calls to, who they want to spend more time with, and ultimately who they're going to, provide a supported admission spot to as well. So, and that is anything else I hit that I missed on that, Jonathan, that you want to hit?
That hit it good.
Okay. Moving along. So college is obviously bigger than a 4-year decision. It really is a 40-year decision, or even a lifetime decision. And the impact of what school you go to. And that's obviously why there's such a allure and attraction to the Ivy League programs, because it's like, wow, if my son has an opportunity to go to a school that is that prestigious academically, that might open up a whole new world of possibilities for them after they graduate. Now, finding the right college fit within the Ivy League program, or other high academic, programs that are out there, is the big deal. And the competition at the next level is stiff, to get an opportunity to go to the next level. And so I'm not going to spend much time on this, but you look at Division I, just under 300 schools. And if you go down here at the bottom, 2% of high school baseball players are going to secure a Division I roster spot. So there's a lot more high academic recruiting opportunities at a Division III level than there are at a Division I level. And I would fair to say, if we say strictly high academic schools, Jonathan, what would you say in terms of out of the Division I? Maybe there's like 40 to 45 like prestigious academic Division I schools that are out there.
Yeah, I would say like maybe 35 to 45, just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And then depending on like how high academic you want to call it. In terms of like that top tier, I would say, yeah, probably maybe even closer to 35 in that top tier.
Sure. All right, moving along. Why don't you touch on this, Jonathan, just kind of the timeline for recruiting?
Yeah, it's a question that we get a lot, right? Like, all right, well, when's the right time, to start kind of, getting seen? When's the right time to, start reaching out? The thing I always say to guys is figure June 1st, going into your junior year, finishing your sophomore year, and then that process will start then, and it'll take you probably through July or August of your going into your senior year is kind of the, towards the end of that process in terms of high academic recruiting. So that's why we say interest, in recruiting trips, 10th to 12th grade. It kind of covers the back end of your 10th grade year and the beginning of your 12th grade year. But that's kind of the way the process works. You figure, you call it like 14 months or 13 or 14 months in that process. That's kind of the timeline of Ivy recruiting in terms of what are they really able to look at, just because as a ninth grader, you're not going to have too much, academic information for them to really kind of grasp where you're even at. Whereas once you get 4, semesters or 8 quarters in school, you kind of have a little bit of a better idea of, what are they going to be like academically? Maybe they take the test early, but you just get a little bit more of a body of work when you kind of start at, once they're kind of finishing that sophomore year.
Absolutely. This is a good slide to bring up because many of you as families are getting contacted by different recruiting companies, different local recruiters, just kind of there's a lot of people trying to solicit their services to you. And, just things to be careful of. You can just kind of read some of these bullet points here and making sure that you're just not a number in a large factory approach of trying to help, your son and family in this process. That's a big one. I would say another big one is if someone says, oh, yes, I have a bunch of Ivy League recruiting experience, I would say, is that baseball specific? Number one. Is that only academic specific, or does it, combine both? And then, do they have the bandwidth to be able, meaning do they have the time and energy to be able to dedicate, to your family in this process and make it a very personalized process? Because we've touched on each Ivy League program is different. That means each Ivy League college and relationship is going to be different as well for how they recruit and what they look for. And what's the key, we'll say, I guess selling story for a player, to the right schools. Because Jonathan was working with a player out of Texas, that ended up, committing to an Ivy League program. And I would say, traditionally, Texas is kind of not the strongest hotbed for Ivy League recruiting, right? Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, there's, you'll get you've got maybe a guy a year, you may have 4 or 5 guys on the roster, maybe, from Texas. It's, you got to be pretty, selective in terms of, trying to get down there and see those guys. But yeah, you're not going to have a ton. You're not going to have your whole roster made up of guys from Texas. That's for sure.
Yeah. Someone brought up a question here. What role can travel ball coaches play in the process? Can they advocate for players and contact the college coaches? I'm curious, Jonathan, as you guys were getting, contacted by different travel ball coaches, and a lot of coaches, right? They'll say, oh yeah, I got a kid, who's, he's not like a big time, D1 player, but he's definitely good enough for the Ivies, right? You hear that all the time. So
and that's one of the things we used to try to tell guys and especially travel coaches that that will tell you, I have a guy that I know can play for you, and you say, well, when was the last time you came out and saw us play? Well, I never saw you play, but I know he can play for you. It's like, well, we're in terms of what are coaches looking for in recommendations? The coach's jobs that's their job to make a decision whether you can play or not for them. Right. So what they're looking for when somebody gives a recommendation is objective measurements. So whether that's fastball velocity, whether that's, 60 time, what they're looking for more of that. And then basically what they're going to do is they will go in and then determine whether or not, that whether you are good enough or not. But that's more what they're looking for in terms of, they're not looking for a coach to tell them like, hey, I know this guy can play for you. And you turn back and say, well, when was the last time you saw us play? Never. Well, then how do you know how good we are? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's handle another question here. Do Ivy League coaches want to hear from a recruiting specialist? Is that a turnoff or versus hearing from the player only? So I'll let you tackle that too, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, coaches want to hear from the player because they want to know that there's interest, right? There's recruiting's a two-way street. They have to want you, but you also have to want them too. So if you're not reaching out and you're not responding to things, well, that doesn't bode very well for you, because they're going to say, well, he's not really that interested in us. The one thing I will tell you is that the more people that can vouch for you, and your ability, the better, because, even with coaches going back out here in the next few weeks, they're going to be, and I've heard some stories of guys that, need to submit approval to get, travel, to be able to travel. And it's an 8-step process for them to, to get the ability the approval to go and travel. So guys are going to be out and about. There's no doubt about it. But if you can figure out a way to, get yourself in front of coaches without, having to, have them, physically see you play, that's a big advantage for you too.
Absolutely. And I'll just I'll show a little bit about kind of how our program works. And this is important whether you're doing this on your own or not. You got to have a profile organized, everything, video, stats, transcript, etc. Make it easy for college coaches. What we do, which is unique, is we put everybody through a rating system and we write our own scouting reports on every one of the players. So kind of what Jonathan talked about is, imagine you're, the Ivy League head coach, at Princeton or Harvard or whatever school it is. And your coaching staff as well. You're trying to cut through the noise of just getting a recommendation from, a high school coach or a player reaching out to you, and you're trying to get as many references and scouting reports on a player as possible. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to cross-reference talent across the country and stack rank them against each other. So there is a huge advantage for the athlete who is being well supported by a coach who those colleges trust to help rise above the noise and the confusion of a lot of the players that are already out there. You kind of combine that with the right video, the right metrics, and the right ongoing, updates to college coaches, plus the right in-person showcase and camp strategy and approach. And that's where you get those three things working together. You get the relationships, you get the kind of the online recruiting, and then you get the, the in-person or on-site recruiting. And those all have to work together to really move up the recruiting board with schools. And that's whether that's an Ivy League school or that's a D3 school or whatever it might be. Those are the three keys to success. And kind of, we try to do it in a unique way by, breaking down a rating process and an evaluation. We break this down per position. So let's say you're a right-handed pitcher, who's a 23 right now, and you're 6 foot, 160 pounds, and you're throwing 82 to 83 miles an hour. Like, we have an idea of how you're going to project. And that's actually a player who, if has the right academic profile and athletic projectability, is a player that Ivy League coaches are going to want to pay attention to, because 82, 83 right now in May of the sophomore year could quickly become 85 to 87 in the fall. Like, if the bump in the trajectory is going to be right, and Jonathan has seen this, time and time again, these Ivy League coaches, they're banking on the player who literally likely hasn't hit their peak performance yet and is going to trend later than those Michigan, Duke, Vanderbilt that are trying to get the kid who's 15 years old and already throwing 88. So, our approach is very similar to a college, coach's approach to recruiting. we're only going to work, especially with the high academic recruiting process, with the right academic standing, the right level of college baseball prospect, an open and coachable student athlete, open and coachable parents to this process, because this is more competitive than you can even imagine. And if you're not open and coachable, it makes us tough to do our job. And then fifth is really the character on and off the field. And we strictly, limit the number of players that we advise per year. And so do our advisors. We really have, 3 of our staff who's dedicated to high academic, Ivy League, we'll say Ivy League kind of specific recruiting. Jonathan's one of them. And then we have 2 other guys that have good experience as well. And that's unique because the recruiting process for the Ivy League is actually very unique as well. So you got to match, we want to match the right staff and coaches on our staff with the right families. And so we've had a number of success stories. These are just a few, but I'm gonna drill in on Max, because his story is pretty unique. So he's a 2021 grad, about to go off to Princeton here in the fall. And his family, they were out in Arizona, never been through the recruiting process, had a lot of questions. He was doing well academically, wanted to see if, the Ivies were a possibility. Being recruited, sight unseen with COVID was just a different challenge. We had to really get creative with what we were doing with video and metrics and showing the progression. And also making sure that from a background standpoint, that it wasn't just our organization, let's say, sticking our neck out for this player, but we also were coordinating the high school and the travel ball and even other relationships to be part of the process, because with COVID, it was just a different animal. Normally, our process can be much more straightforward. And I think it's going to return for us to be much more straightforward. Kind of like, I think Jonathan's process with the player in Texas that he helped, get recruited. Jonathan, was that a pretty straightforward process because of, because of the player you were working with in the situation?
Yeah, it made it very easy. And obviously the ability of the player and the academic fit, was what made it very, very, very smooth. So it was a pretty easy transition, and it was a pretty easy, call for me and it wasn't only the school he ended up at, but a lot of the other schools he ended up with offers at. It was a fast process. He just checked off a lot of boxes, and it just made it super, super, super easy. And we were able to kind of zoom through the process probably faster than we would have been, able to with some other guys, just because obviously my experience with the schools he'd kind of been in touch with and my relationships with a lot of those guys, we kind of were able to kind of fly really, really quickly through the process with them, and he ended up getting committed, which was awesome.
I'm curious, how many schools were kind of in the running at the end?
In terms of the interest, he had generated a ton of interest. Like I would say, we sent out an email, and he had 8 or 9 phone conversations within 48 hours. But really at the end, he had kind of gotten it down. Him and his family had kind of gotten it down. They had it down to about 3. He had 5 offers. We got it down to about 3. And there was one school in particular that was his dream school the whole way. And we kind of knew that as long as everything, checked out, that was where it was going to be. But he had 3 at the end that we kind of chose between. But, like I said, it started with, about 8 or 9 phone calls, and then it got to about 5 offers. And then within 3 weeks, the whole thing was done. But, he had 3 that he had kind of gotten it down to. So.
Absolutely. And this is just kind of, that sentiment that or that we just shared right now. It's really important to be able to get the ears and attention of college coaches because of how competitive this process is. So, and this process has changed and will continue to evolve. And like Jonathan mentioned, if coaches are getting limitations on traveling, with their budgets to go recruit, it's going to become more and more about relationships and other ways to hack, the recruiting process and circumvent, all legally, but just circumvent, this process in a way that, gives players an advantage for the right type of schools. And so we put together something. We did this on the last high academic workshop, and we've put together a whole high academic series. And that is like this Ivy League Masterclass. We put together a high academic evaluation where we look at a student athlete's transcript, their video, their test scores, anything we can get our hands on. This is exactly what an Ivy League coach is going to do. And then we do a 30-minute assessment call to break down, here's where you are, here's the best approach to the right camps or showcases, here's how to handle this, here's where I think your probabilities are, for this level of college baseball and why, and really lay it all out. Because most families, we've been doing this 12 years, most families don't even know exactly where they are right now and exactly what they need to be doing over the next 30, 60, 90 days to put themselves and as players put themselves in the best possible position, to maximize the recruiting opportunities or potential, offers if things move fast. And so we created this to be able to do that. We also throw in a database with every college program in the country to be able to search and sort by. It includes the contact information for every head coach as well. And you want to include the head coaches in the recruiting process. So whether you're going to, send an email out on your own, being able to get them their contact information without, worrying about, is it the right email? Because a lot of coaches will put down just a general baseball email on the website. And then we've done two master classes, and we're going to do one more on D3 that we're going to throw into this. And so kind of the total value of this program is, $649. And then regular price is normally $499. And then we offer for the next 48 hours, we break it down to $299 to give kind of a discount for people that want to take action. And then we provide a discount for the next 24 hours or today, where families can take advantage of everything that I just went over. Now, with all this being said, we evaluate every athlete before we consider working with them one-on-one. So many of you filled out before you registered for this. You provided a video link. You provided us some other information. And this is kind of our evaluation link. We need this type of information to be able to evaluate, to know that if we work together, we're confident that we can help generate results, because we don't take on families that we do not feel confident that we can help get recruited, or players that we can help get recruited, and families that we can ultimately save, as much money and as much of, and really expand and maximize the number of recruiting offers as well. So going back to the slide deck, I'm gonna put the slide up again, and if anybody ends up making the decision to take advantage of this program here, this can be applied to our one-on-one packages. And we have 3 different one-on-one packages when we choose to work with an individual player and family. And those programs are where we roll our sleeves up and walk a family through every step of the process. And so if that's something that you're serious about, you really have one of 2 options right now. One is you take advantage of this package here, and we apply anything that you spend with us in this package to a potential one-on-one package. if the player and family are good enough, or you can fill out the evaluation that we have on our website and fill that out. And then we will evaluate each athlete and reach out to the select athletes and families that we feel that we have an opportunity to realistically help. So I'm going to throw in the chat, if I can get this working for me, the link to this program here. And I'll throw in the also the discount code as well. That's good for the next 24 hours. And then I want to open it up. We don't have much time for questions. I know we tried to cover as many questions during the process, and that was to make sure that we were covering the most critical questions, and we covered a lot of material today. Jonathan, was there anything else you wanted to kind of make sure that we added that maybe wasn't touched upon?
I think the biggest thing too, and to kind of wrap everything up is that, right, like we talked about, 64 potential, students or potential student athletes going to play baseball in the Ivy League in a class. I think the biggest thing for guys to remember is that there are other options, maybe not even Division I options, that, are high academic options that are fantastic baseball options as well. So, and one thing to always keep in mind is if a coach is, taking time out of his day to reach out to you and kind of talk to you, don't kick anybody off the list until you do a little bit of research and kind of hear what they have to say. Because that's one of the things that, is a good way to get crossed off of a list is you have absolutely no interest on the phone when a coach, reaches out and tries to talk to you because you're only looking at, these 3 schools. Give yourself a really good option, to go and play. And that's, kind of keep your options open is the best way to put it.
Yeah, 100%. And we got a couple more minutes. I'll just try to field a question or two that might come up right now. So I'll look at the chat and who has the best baseball field in the Ivy? Jonathan, why don't you answer that one really quick?
I'm not going there. They're all really nice. They are very, very, very nice.
They're very different, but what is the deadline for a 22 player to get recruited? There's no particular deadline except the admissions deadline, but I'd say, the window is closing and it's closing fast for 22s. That's the reality. Some of the Ivies have already made commitments to 22s. Most of them already have, but they still have a majority of recruiting to still be done. I would say in general, I mean, it's January 1, right? Jonathan is pretty much the drop dead, date for Ivies.
Yeah.
Yep. Let me see if we got another question we can handle. So, okay, you don't see a code in the chat. So I'll just put it, the code is, GPA is the discount code for the 24-hour, and then Ivy is the discount code for the 48-hour discount. Yeah, and I would say just in general, as we sum this up, the recruiting process is something that you want to go through. You're going to go through once in your life as a student athlete. And if you're supporting a son in this process, they're going to go through it once. And the college decision is such a critical decision and arguably probably one of the larger investments that you're going to make in your son's life. And arguably one of the biggest decisions that your son's going to make in his life, especially, before he's coming out of high school. And so really evaluating, do we have this all figured out on our own, or could we use, guidance in this process? And to whatever degree guidance that is, whether it's, just an initial assessment like we're offering with this high academic package, or it is, something that is more one-on-one. I think that's something to really evaluate as a family as you look through this and think about, what are the goals, and not looking back and having regret and say, I wish we would have done some things differently. I mean, I'm a firm believer that everybody needs guidance in this journey of being a student athlete, trying to take their game from high school to college. And we really limit the type of, the number of families that we work with to make sure that we can provide the guidance in a very personalized way. So if we work with your family, creating that target list is going to be a unique and individual and personalized process. How we reach out to college coaches is going to be unique and personalized, to your son. And so that's just what we've seen generates the best results and the best opportunities. So we're going to wrap it up. I know there's more questions that would come up. And yeah, do we work with non-high academic schools? Absolutely. We work with, we're in touch with over 500 college coaches at every different level, at all academic ranges across the country. And so, and we have a database of, every college coach, in the country we can reach out to and be able to work with in terms of their program. So we're not limited from that standpoint. We do have a portion of our staff that just has so much high academic experience. It really makes a lot of sense for them to focus on supporting those families. So that is unique. Awesome. Glad you guys were able to join. Jonathan, any final words?
That was awesome. Thanks, guys, for getting on with us tonight.
Yep. Thanks for making the time. All of our contact information is here. You can find our website. Highly recommend following us on Twitter if you're not yet. We drop a lot of value and information. And I just want to thank everybody, for, their time and involvement and really interaction in this process, because it makes it, more beneficial if the questions are flowing. And just glad we were able to hit on so many, important keys to success relative to the Ivy League recruiting process. So we'll stay on like another minute just before we wrap it up. And thanks again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.